uses, is able to penetrate wherever we are in our journey without Him. And sometimes I think it takes, it's the repetitive punches.
Wear you down.
Yeah, exactly. And so.
Yeah, the same with me. I look back on my story of becoming Christian, not necessarily becoming Catholic. I actually stepped out and did some things to become Catholic, I'm sure with God's grace, but becoming Christian, I mean, I was the one on my mission who would get all the evangelicals. I mean, I would talk to other missionaries and they wouldn't run into the evangelicals and the people giving me the literature. And then I have the aunt, the leading aunt, who starts sending me the books by Watchman Nee and other evangelicals. And then I go to this uncle's wedding, would also become an evangelical, and see this scripture, Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever over the cross. You know, all those things that I didn't realize what was going on at the time, but I really wasn't seeking to become a Christian, but it was just one interruption after another. And I didn't see that, I didn't realize it until after I look back on it. And I often wonder if it was because of my Christian baptism. I was baptized as a Christian, and you're into God's family, and He's going to keep you there if He has to, drag you kicking and screaming. But yeah, there are these little things, these little things along the way that I had nothing to do with. It just,
People very often experience their vocation to ministry that way.
Yeah.
There's consistent sort of nudges. You try to ignore them, you put them off to something else, but it's that sort of, a succession of blows.
Yes, and it is, in the scriptures that we shared with Small Faith, it is that God seeks us out, and He leaves the 99 to go seek us out. And,
Hound of Heaven's a good title. Yeah.
The poem isn't as good as the title, in my opinion, but it says something.
Yeah.
Like, when you were talking about free will, when I was just doing this in RCIA in this room a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Genesis and the story of the fall. So it says, God created man in His own image. So I asked the group, what does that mean? And one guy said, well, I think God looks like us, and anthropomorphism and all that. So, but eventually I get to tell them what I think it means, which is that God is perfectly free. God is sovereign. We say that. So God is perfectly free. So God made us perfectly free. And the mystery is how the freedom of God to do what He wants, and our freedom to respond however we want, that in that interaction is where faith happens. And the other thing is that we say that God is love. And that's just words. But love requires freedom. You can't love somebody by compulsion. You have to be free to do it. So God made us free for that reason, so that we could love God and others, but so we could love, so we would have that capacity.
Or choose not to love.
Or choose not to, but it would not be possible without the freedom.
Yeah.
And so somehow in all that is the mystery of how people come to faith. The world is clearly built, it seems to me, on this foundation of you can only go so far. And I remember thinking this when I was an atheist, that you can't prove there's no God, and you can't prove there is. There is this thing built into the nature of the world that is unprovable, and you have to step off. And you can step off either way, but you have to step off. There's nothing solid. It's Kierkegaard, it talks about the leap of faith. That's necessary. And I think that's why many people don't get there, is because they get to that edge and they go, there's nothing to prove. Why? How do I know there'll be anything there to catch me? So they won't step off. And I understand the reluctance, I really do.
Sounds like yours is my experience.
There's a story told about a imam in a Muslim congregation. And Catholic priest, it was during the 9/11 time, and the priest was trying to invite the Muslim community in so people could know more about them, so there'd be less suspicion and hate and all that. So he invited the imam to come and explain Islam to his adult ed class. And at the last minute, the imam called and told the pastor, I can't be there. There's been a death, I have to comfort the family, but I'm going to send somebody who is perfectly qualified and he'll speak in my place. So the guy showed up and gave this terrific presentation to this adult ed group about what Islam meant and the 5 pillars and all the rest of it. And so at the end, coffee and so forth, and they were not coffee, like Muslims like us, but like Mormons. But anyway, so somebody went up to the guy in the social time afterwards and said, so what is your position at the mosque? And the guy said, well, I don't have a position at the mosque. I own the video store in the corner. But he was that well informed as a layman that the imam was perfectly confident to just let him explain the faith to these heathen. And you wonder how many pastors would be that comfortable.
Wow.
Certainly not
Some of them don't even trust us to do poll announcements.
So the thresholds of conversion are, can I trust you? That's the first thing when a person is considering stepping off, is can I trust the person who's inviting me to step off? And then the second threshold, I think, is curiosity. There has to be some sort of curiosity about what is this that I'm being asked to step into. If you're not interested, then, but the trust comes before the interest. And then there has to be an openness to discover something new. And then the final, so if you have all that, if there's a relationship, and maybe the trust is really with God. Can I trust God? Is there a personal God out there that I can trust? And then is there curiosity about what that means? And then is there an openness to pursuing it? And then finally, the last step is discipleship. And you can't put them in the wrong order, or it just wouldn't work. So here they are. Can I trust you? Curiosity, openness, and discipleship.
And the curiosity might come first before the can I trust you. A lot of times I think people are curious and then they might approach you if they feel like you're a person that they can trust.
Yeah, maybe. But again, that trusting God is a big part of it.
Oh, definitely.
And if you don't believe God can be personal, go back to the statistics, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
How can I trust an impersonal God? If God is just this power that created everything, almost like an explosion. The explosion is powerful, but it is indiscriminate.
Mm-hmm.
Do I want to step in the path of that explosion? So,
John was saying that when we were in Hawaii, I went ziplining for the first time.
oh, I was going to ask. You didn't seem to want to go there.
Well, and honestly, before I got there, I was excited. I wasn't nervous. I was just excited to be doing it. And as I approached the first, there were 9 of them. As I approached the first one and got harnessed up, all of a sudden I was like, this is not going to be as fun as I thought it would be.
There were 9 separate zip lines?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Like
And each one
stations.
got longer and
Oh,
bigger.
okay.
And you have, once you stop the first one, there's no going back, is there?
Well, you can go back, but it's a very long walk. So, there was trepidation with each one, but then we got to the last one, it was 1,200 feet, and you had to go up this, I say ladder, but it was really like a rope thing. And it was straight up, and I'm not in the best shape, and I had already just climbed to the side of a mountain. And you go with somebody else, the last one is a dual one, and we had been so excited because we were going with we had gone with some friends of ours, and one of the things that she and I had talked about doing for the last year was going ziplining together, so then we decided to do it in Hawaii together. So we got up there and, it was so high and so far, and I was like, I just can't do this. And you know, everybody is saying, yes, you can do it, you can do it, and she's saying, yeah, you can do it, and the guide says, just sit back and just let it take you. It's whole control thing. And so my friend Marlene says, yeah, just like this, just sit back, and off she goes. And then I'm like, oh, well, she didn't mean to go, but it did.
Oh.
I
Wow.
just kind of took her, and then I'm like, oh, well, she's fine, I don't have to do it now, because my point was to do it together, you know? But going through this whole thing, you know, can I trust that it's gonna hold me?
Right.
And it wasn't the flying through the air, it was, you know, can I give up control in order to do this?
Mhm.
And then, you know, the curiosity of what's it gonna feel like, not just to fly through the air, but what's it gonna feel like if I do something that I'm so terrified of doing, you know? And then, you know, going through and now being able to tell people that, yes, I did it, and, I mean, by the time I got to the end, I was crying because I couldn't believe that I actually did it when I was so terrified of doing it.
Mhm.
So, you know, just looking at these steps, it's kind of the same thing.
That sounds like it. Would you put them in a different order? Would you put curiosity first? Sounds like you might.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know with that last one, if I would have.
And was it any part of, because you didn't really mention the beauty of the experience. It was mostly just overcoming the fear.
Well, I think for the last part, I mean, through the other 8, yes. You know, overlooking the jungle and whatever, and I would tell myself, just look around because you're not gonna have this experience again, you know, so enjoy it.
So there's actually time to look around, you're not flying, aren't
You
you
are,
on a
but-
cable that?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay, yeah.
and you determine how fast you go by the
Oh,
kind of
okay.
your position, well, you're supposed to be able to slow down and turn around, I couldn't do any of that. But
I'd be afraid to slow down for fear that I would make
yes,
the
make it
next.
all the way around, exactly,
Mitch has said several times that it was the stepping off
yeah.
that was so
Each time.
terrifying, you know.
Oh, sure.
It wasn't the flying through the air.
So the crying at the end, was that just a sense of just joy and exhilaration because it was just such an awesome experience, or was it relief that you survived it, or was it?
I think it was an internal thing for me, the joy that I actually gave up the control and did it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's a real accomplishment in life. It's a life lesson.
It is, yeah.
Takes sometimes, you know, an accumulation of experiences to get there, and then there's backsliding and so forth, but you sort of had this sort of radical thing all at one time.
So,
I'm sure the people behind me waiting to surprise were thinking, boy, this is a pretty quick thing. I mean, I was so close to turning around and saying, no, I'm not gonna do it. I mean, so close.
Yeah.
she was much braver than I didn't, and nor would I, but,
I can't imagine doing it
I
myself.
was so proud that you when I did that.
It's admirable.
It's a cool thing. It's very, very cool.
And you can see the steps as you're talking through them, you know.
So this is what Benedict says. Faith is above all a personal, intimate encounter with Jesus, and to experience his closeness, his friendship, his love. Only in this way does one learn to know him even more, evermore, to love and follow him evermore. May this happen to each one of us. I just thought this was a personal, intimate encounter. I'm not sure this is the best place to tell this story, but I have it down in the notes to tell it, so I'm gonna, what order to tell it in. We were at the parish on a Sunday.
Here.
No, where we came from.
Okay.
And there was a woman with a baby sitting in the back of church by herself. And Mary always makes a big fuss over babies. So I went up to this woman, oh, how was your baby? And the baby was very young. And just like Mary does, made a big fuss over this baby. Didn't think, she probably has done that dozens of times. Big deal. Years go by. And we have a guy in our CIA. And at some point, the sponsors showed up. And so this guy's wife was his sponsor. Didn't recognize her. I'm not sure I met her in the first place. And they have a son who's probably at this point 8 years old. And so the wife says to Mary, "You don't remember me, but I remember you. I was sitting in the back of church, and I just had this baby out of wedlock. And I was sure that I did not belong here, that all these people were holy, and I was this sinner with this baby. And if people knew that I had had this baby without a husband, they'd have kicked me out. And you came up and hugged me and loved me and my baby. So I decided to stay in the church. And I met this man who was not Catholic, and now he's becoming Catholic."
Wow.
You never know.
It was something to see. I mean, years later,
Yeah. Well, that's scripture. I planted, Apollos watered, and God caused the growth. Mary planted the seed. Yeah.
or watered it or
Or
something.
watered it, yeah.
I mean, there was something that brought her to church in the first place. She wanted a connection. She wanted, she was there in the first place.
Yeah.
Mary would have been able to make a big fuss over the baby had it been if she'd never come in the door.
True, yeah.
But, we could have, and without, being mean or sinful or anything, we could have just, she's there by herself, she wants to be by herself. I do that all the time. I walk by people who are sitting by themselves and don't reach out. Something happened there.
Yeah.
Kind of, we were talking before about people coming in and being lost sometimes out of desire. I mean, it might be, but I still think within each of us somewhere there is this driving need to be not so much recognized, but just to be accepted and loved as we are, sinners that we are. And we don't take advantage of that, lack of a better term, as often as we should. So,
And the movements, I think, do that, that they plug people into some place where they can experience that. In marriage encounter, there's an encounter between husband and wife that, that I really am loved. This is not just a routine. This is, and Crucio too. God really does love me. Something happens, and you're right. It's a hunger, and maybe it's Augustine again says that my heart is searching the Lord and won't rest, restless, and it won't rest until it rests in you. And there's that the desire to be loved.
And Mary, I mean, of all people, I could just envision her as, just being able to share that gentleness and love, so effectively that years later, people's lives.
That's one of her gifts. It really is.
It is.
At different times in our marriage, I have admired and resented it. But it is that sort of, we both meet somebody, and they will turn to her and begin to share themselves.
Sharon's the same way. They'll talk to her about personal, intimate things before they will to me. Family members on her side or my side. She just has that gift.
It is a gift.
Yeah. I think it's more, what's the word I want? You find it more in the female gender than you do.
Oh, maybe.
There's that nurturing that males
Safe.
just don't have.
You're
Yeah.
safe.
Yeah,
You won't judge me, you're safe.
yeah, yeah.
That's right.
I said John has that.
image has a tenderness, an ability to build up trust with folks instantly. And I tease her sometimes, I said, how do you attract all the nuts? But people just,
I think Jesus was like that.
yes, yeah.
So there's a lot of stories about St. Patrick. I'm sort of a fan, but this is one of my favorites. You know the story of St. Patrick. He wasn't Irish, right?
But he was a missionary too.
Well, he was actually a shepherd who got kidnapped by Irish pirates,
Oh, okay.
taken to Ireland and enslaved.
Mm.
So and then he was a shepherd in Ireland as a slave,
Okay.
and he escaped and went back to Gaul, where he was from, and began to prepare for the priesthood. All the time he was a slave in Ireland, he would hear a voice. And the voice would say, "This will not always be your way." So he goes back to Gaul and he prepares for the priesthood, and eventually he's ordained a bishop. But 18 years after he leaves Ireland and he escapes, he's an escaped slave. 18 years later, he goes back. And part of that was wanting to form himself, but part of it was fear. Because what happens to escaped slaves, if they're caught, is that they're executed. So he was afraid to go back, but 18 years later, and he keeps hearing feeling this call to go back and evangelize in Ireland. But he hates them. He hates the Irish people. They kidnapped him, they enslaved him for all this time. All his growing up years, separated him from his family. He hates them. So he's walking with some other clerics along a road in Ireland after he's gone back. And these dirty people, and an old man's coming the other way. And he says, I might want to get this down. Are you Patrick? The old man says. And Patrick says, yeah, I'm Patrick. Who's asking? And the guy says, I've come to tell you the stories of the Irish. And Patrick says, and who do I have to thank for this great privilege? And that same voice that he heard earlier as a shepherd that said, this will not always be your way, and he hadn't heard it now for years. That same voice came back to him at that moment and said, you have me to thank.
Wow.
So he invites him in back to his monastery, and the man just spends every night telling him stories about the Irish people. And Patrick learns to love them.
But he's not in Ireland yet. He's still
At
in
that
Gaul.
point he's in Ireland.
He's back
He's
in
gone
Ireland.
back.
Okay.
So the point, though, I think, is that you can't evangelize somebody until you love them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you saw Bill Burns posted on Facebook, I think it was last night. Somebody asked him on his blog, well, how does it feel now that you're ordained? What's the difference? How do you feel? And one of the things Bill says in his blog is that I find that I love people more. I think that's the grace, one of the graces of the sacrament of ordination. And I had that experience. I can remember sitting in the deacon's chair one of the first Sundays after I was ordained and looking out at the congregation. And I lived in that parish for 28 years. And I realized, and I just felt differently about them than I had 2 weeks earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't evangelize anybody too long.
Where is Gaul?
France.
France. So his ethnicity was French.
It's French.
He was captured as a French slave in Ireland.
Yeah, dragged across the channel
Huh.
to. I'm sure he was sold. There were pirates.
Yeah.
Pirates. They
Yeah.
captured this kid and sold him into slavery.
Mm.
And somebody who had land
Mm.
and flocks
Mm.
bought him to tend the flocks.
Mm.
And where's the kid going to go? He's 10 years old. He can't swim in the channel.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah. There's a million really interesting stories about Patrick. The Easter fire story.
Mm.
Mary's ethnicity. I have all this stuff. the Druids were the controlling religious faction in Ireland before Patrick. And so the Druids, on the feast of the vernal equinox, told the people that you couldn't have fire, there could be no light in all of Ireland. No, it's a legend of some sort, but no fire at all on the night of the vernal equinox, because the spirits of the forest will scare them away or whatever it was. What happened in that particular year, that was the night of the Easter Vigil. So Patrick found the highest point of land he could find, and lit the Easter fire. So anyway, one of the things we're dealing with when we're talking about bringing people to faith is the amount of religious illiteracy. There is. Part of catechesis has always been being able to tell the Bible stories. And generally in our culture, people have been able to plug into them. That they know something about Moses and the Red Sea. Or they know something about Daniel and the lion's den. Or they know something about David and Goliath.
Yeah.
So I was teaching RCIA again in the other parish, and there was a very well-educated woman. She had a couple master's degrees. She was a master teacher. She worked for the school district in some sort of supervisory capacity. She was marrying a Catholic who was a tree trimmer. So sort of disparate education. And but she wanted to become Catholic so they could raise her children in common faith. So I would say something like, well, you know how Moses led the Israelites across the Red Sea.
What?
Or I'd say, and this happened, there were about 3 instances before I realized what was going on. She's Jonah and the whale, the big fish. No idea what I was talking about. And David and Goliath was the third one. So I realized, and so I was sharing this with the pastor. This is a little difficult because when I go to a reference, she doesn't have the reference. So I ended up that year telling a lot of stories. Rather than just referring to them, I would tell them because I didn't know how else to do it. And the pastor said, you will find that this is more and more often going to be true going forward now. That people are raised without any religious reference in their lives. It used to be that even non-religious households weren't intentional about excluding them. But now, non-religious households are intentionally excluding religious reference. So the kids have no idea what you're talking about. And the perfect example of this was, there was somebody selling a cross on eBay. True story. And the caption, there was a picture of it, and the caption was, "The little man has fallen off."
Oh, the little man, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Sterling silver cross, the little man has fallen off.
Yeah.
So talk about, so that, again, that's the culture that we are evangelizing. And to be aware of that. I mean, Patrick had to be aware of the stories of the Irish. We have to be aware that this is the culture that we're coming to. These are the people we're called to love. The people that don't have the references, that they see a cross without the little man on it. They apparently have no idea who the little man is.
When my daughter started dating her now husband TJ, and they're both now Catholic, of course, that kind of stuff, but Christmas was coming, and Gina said something about, we ought to get a manger scene for our apartment, some sort of old nativity scene. And TJ said, so that's a little thing where you get like the Maid Marian, or whatever her name is.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
he had no idea of like the Virgin Mary, the Virgin Birth.
Wow.
He raised in Pocatello, Idaho.
The Maid Marian.
The Maid Mary.
Out of Robinson.
Yeah, he'd heard of that and knew that.
And so, and there's this Mary, and she's, okay.
Yeah, that was.
Must be the same person.
Yeah. And it just about blew Gina away. She just couldn't believe it, you
We
know?
take so much for granted.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was not raised in a religious household, far from it, but we always were kind of just absorbed. Or when we'd go see grandparents, we went to Sunday school, and they always knew.
Yeah, I knew the stories.
Yeah.
I
I
was,
always knew the stories.
Yeah.
I didn't really think about people today intentionally not wanting their children to hear those stories.
when we were kids, it was the culture. Now it's becoming less and less the
Wow.
culture.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, the schools have excluded it. You know,
Yeah.
anything, you know, they get in trouble if they go there.
Right.
So the schools have excluded it. So if the, you know, now we're in probably to a second or third generation that didn't get it in school.
Wow.
Mhm.
So and maybe, you know, maybe it's intentional in some cases, maybe it's not even intentional, maybe it's just that
It's just
for
not
two
part of it.
generations now,
Yeah,
you know, you hear expressions like the writing on the wall.
yeah.
Where is that from? Well, it's from Daniel. But, you know, a house divided itself cannot stand. Who said that? Abraham Lincoln. Everybody knows
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln said that.
True.
Yeah.
So basically, you know, when John Paul started talking about, John Paul II started talking about evangelization, he talked about self. That evangelization starts with yourself, your own continuing conversion. It has to be there first. And it is continuing. It's not a moment. It's not, well, this year I'll spend up my own conversion, then I'll move on. It's always self first, and it's ongoing. And then it's the community you live in, which is Catholic. You know, for us, it's re-evangelizing people that are in the pews, the 48% that don't believe that God's personal.
Mhm.
You know, that somehow bringing people to a realization that God does love them personally. And frankly, that's all I ever preach about. I haven't, I mean, 12 years, I haven't moved on from that.
Mhm.
That every homily somehow gets back to this, you know, faith is a personal relationship with Jesus. And He wants one with you. So it's, the shoe's on your foot now. You know.
Yeah, every RCI class I teach, I bring it up, that first relationship. I make a point to bring it up in every lesson. None of this works
Without that.
without that, yeah.
And then finally, after that, then it becomes, you know, reaching out beyond the community. And I think it eventually has to get beyond just circling the wagons and helping each other.
Mhm.
But it can be implicit, it doesn't have to be explicit. But there's evangelization that goes on just by people seeing how you live. And that's a big part of it too. I was planning a lunch break at 11:30, and it is 11:30. So,
So we're on time.
we're on time.
Good.
Yeah,
Yeah, Sharon, she works in an office, it's a lawyer's office, and she found out rather quickly that most all of them were very anti-religion. And she said, you know, it's just impossible to even, but, you know, lately, when I say lately, the last year or two, when they talk about their weekend, oh, we went skiing, or we went, like this week, Sharon said, oh, we went to a deacon ordination, we saw 6 men ordained to the deacon, it was this beautiful service, blah, blah, blah. And she just makes it part of, you know, what'd you do? Well, we had a grandson who was sick, and we prayed, and you know, we went to the doctor, and it's okay, or whatever. And just getting in those little snippets of your life. They're sharing their life, why
Fair
can't we
enough.
share our life, you know? So, yeah.
you know, if what we say is true, there is this hole that can only be filled one way.
Mm-hmm.
And people will eventually come to that, I think. People eventually, and they try to fill it with other things. They try to fill it with alcohol or sex or whatever. But the hole doesn't go away, and so again, and then you find somebody who doesn't seem to have the hole in their life and say, well, I wonder how they're
Well,
feeling.
they get along, yeah.
And, you know, that's, I think, what happens. So, I'm gonna babysit the equipment again, I think.
And don't forget to turn the camera off.
No. So,
So you're not going to lunch with us? Is that what you're saying?
well, I can go to lunch with you, I suppose I could, I think we're the only ones here, I could probably line it up.
We might as well all go together.
Is that all right?
Exactly.
Hi, Mike Brown.
Where shall we go? Any ideas? He brought Mike, or
Yes, I'm in Christ, but I'm good. I don't think I need it. I think I'm